let us know. But at this point, Bernie, I will turn it over to you, and thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to share my screen here. All right. Does this look good? Oh.
That works for me.
Looks good, except my face in the middle. Who do I get to thank for that? All right, first I just want to thank, shout out to Nicole, Alice, Donna, and Manisha. Thanks for helping me get this ready. They're the gas in the engine, all that other good stuff, so thank you. If folks don't know me, my name is Bernie Missoula. I'm the Director of Health and Safety for the IUPAT. I'm an industrial hygienist. I've been practicing for going on 26 years now. Industrial hygiene, lots of fun. My main goal is to try to evaluate and assess job workplace hazards and then assign controls to them. One of which is heat. Heat stress is a pretty significant one. So we're going to go through this course. I'm going to be teaching it as a train the trainer, and I will try to call out things along the way that I think might be important for a trainer to understand if they're going to present this. It was designed when I created it to be done in person. So it would take about 4 hours because there's a pretty significant hands-on activity at the very end where if we are face-to-face, we would have a bunch of wet bulb globe temperature meters that you would set up around your training facility in different spots to try to get some different kinds of readings. In fact, one time I threw one in a car that was out in a parking lot in the desert. And then you would have the students break out into groups. They would go evaluate it and then come back and set some work controls to those readings. But we can't do that here. But instead, we're going to do it as a tabletop small group activity, and we'll give you some values for this activity. With that said, obviously, if it's face-to-face, it's going to go a little longer because, people are going to be more interactive. There's going to be more questions, et cetera. So plan on doing this in 4 hours. It was designed for that, and I've taught it anywhere between 3 and 4 face-to-face, depending upon the number of students you've got. So I'm going to go through and start in just a minute and lead through this, but I'd like to just, acknowledge Ken Seals on the line as well, my partner in crime. He's got a passion for heat stress too. When we first started talking about this, I don't know, a month and a half or 2 months ago, he's like, oh, heat stress, yeah. And so it was a natural kind of fit to put this on for folks. So with that said, Ken, you want to say some words?
I appreciate that, Bernie. Thank you very much. And I appreciate everybody coming to this particular course, as I find it important to share information to our members that can either save their life or keep them from getting injured in the first place. And I think that heat-related issues is not looked at the way it should, because as some of you know, I'm in Las Vegas and it's hot here, so I'm kind of climatized to the Las Vegas weather here. But that doesn't mean that somebody that just moved here is, or somebody that's even lived here but's been in the air conditioner inside all the time is. So heat stress becomes a big issue, and I just think that we need to look at it and take it really serious, because it's one thing that we can do to protect our workers. And I truly believe heat-related issues are preventable. So thank you, Bernie. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Ken. So I think what we're going to do, because we've got a lot of folks, maybe just give a shout out to what district councils are here. And so we can try to get through the course in a timely manner, because I think if we introduce everybody, we might eat up a good portion of the time. So if that's okay with folks, let's find out what district councils we've got represented.
There's 3 of us here from DC3.
Okay. And just so I can start to get oriented with where everybody is, where is DC3 out of?
That's located in Kansas City, Missouri.
Okay. All right. Welcome.
Thanks.
Jason Drake, DC 81, Colorado.
Okay. Thank you.
Mike Morrissey, DC 35, Boston.
Ah, okay, right down the street from me.
Yeah.
There's 3 of us here from District Council 36, Southern California, Sean Padilla, Luis Vitamontes, and Pete Escalera.
It can get a little warm down there.
It can be. It's nice. It's nice right now.
Good, good. Any others?
Bernie, we got Rich Cabral from Boston, Tim Yost from Boston, and Deb Gilcoins from Boston on the call too.
Okay, all right, welcome. And of course, Ken, we know you're from Vegas, right? Which district council are you in though, Ken?
I am in DC 16, local 59.
Okay, all right. All right, if I've missed anybody, if someone hasn't spoken up yet, feel free to just to shout out later as we're going through. With that said, we'll get going. Oddly enough, up here in New Hampshire, I've actually got a heat advisory going on right now. So I'm in the, I think the warning advisory level, which is the second most hot or advisory level for ambient weather temperature. So my office usually gets hot. I did install an air conditioner, but I'm not running it because you won't be able to hear me too well. So if anybody sees me fall off the chair, 911, someone, tell my kids to come get me, put ice on.
Got you back.
All right, so heat stress. This is something that affects a lot of people. It's something that I actually have been involved with for a while. I do some activities where I produce a lot of heat, and some of them are in hot environments. I do different forms of grappling, from judo, wrestling, submission wrestling. Sometimes I put what's called a gi on, which if anybody sees the Karate Kid, it's like the karate outfit, right? And I'm affected differently depending upon if I've been training in that gi for a while or if I haven't been. If I've just been, you know, shorts and t-shirts, even though if it's in the summer, I think I'm in good shape. I throw a gi on to do some classes and I feel like I'm going to die. And then I also do these obstacle course races, and heat stress is a pretty significant issue. A couple races I thought I was going to do really well, but the temperature, for whatever reason, up in Killington, Vermont, decided to spike, and my time was terrible. I'm surprised I made it off the damn mountain. So this affects people, not just at work, but in their daily life. And one thing can lead into another. You know, you can have a long day Sunday mowing your lawn, and it was a terrible hot environment out there, and your body gets beat up from that. And you might not recover before you go back to work on Monday. And so the next thing you know, you're suiting up and you're doing something in a high heat environment, and you're starting the race off sort of behind the mark for your body. So heat stress, can be a significant issue both in our personal life and work. So we're going to go through, we're going to cover a lot of this stuff with this course. And I've included a lot of material for you as trainers that are very good sources to read through. And I'll highlight some of those things as we go on the course. And at any time, if somebody has a question, please, I know, we're not face-to-face, we're on Zoom, but speak up, right? Because this is what it's designed for. We want to, interact as adults, especially as adult trainers, and get our information shared and some learning. I always learn a lot when I do classes. I learn more when people ask questions and give me their points of view as well. So, okay, so this class is made in 5 sections: case studies, statistics and regulations and guidance, physiology, heat-related illness and treatment, work environment and evaluation, work environment controls, and then we've got a final group activity. And again, today we're going to do it, small group format instead of an actual out of the seats hands-on. The learning objectives for this course, we will expect that students will be able to define heat stress, heat strain, and a heat-related illness, list 7 heat-related illnesses and identify their symptoms and first aid measures, list other issues that heat stress can cause, list 2 ways that workers are protected from heat stress through regulations, list 5 heat stress control methods, and then be able to measure environmental conditions and develop a work plan to reduce heat stress for a given job. Now, we're not looking to make heat stress experts for anybody, but a lot of the surface stuff of this, it's not real difficult to understand and grasp. And I think, given the different types of meters that we have, students would get a lot out of doing an activity with this, and then we can walk them through, what a good heat stress plan looks like. And, so that they can be aware of it, that their employer should have one. So with that said, before we get into this, Nicole, do we have any of the poll questions? Do we have the first one ready? Ooh, look at that. So we want to do a little poll here as we get going. So why don't you go ahead and answer this?
Okay, Bernie, everybody's answered. Here are your results.
All right. So are you affected by heat stress at your job? We got always, never, and sometimes. So looks like we're kind of almost split. We got 50% sometimes, 29% or about a quarter, never, and about a quarter, yes, always. All right. So we're going to go through and we're going to see if, you might revise your poll. We're not going to do that openly as a course, but we've got some other poll questions to come up. All right, thank you. Oh, there we go.
From one at DC 36, can you put your names in the chat, please, so Manisha can get them? Thank you.
All right, so this is a quote from the US Navy: outdated, erroneous thinking about developing dehydration tolerance, or that one's unit can stand more than another because they are tougher or more motivated, must be replaced by leadership decisions based on proven facts about heat and cold exposure. The military has done a ton of research on thermal stressors, both heat and cold exposures. One of the documents that I have given out is from the Department of Navy, their heat manual. It is an absolute phenomenal read. I suggest everybody read through that before they decide to teach this course. It's got a lot of good information. They don't want to see, military folks dropping from heat stress and cold stress. So they put a lot of work into this, and, they're expected to be in some parts of the globe, which are not the United States, right? Jungle climates, things like that. So there's a whole wide of heat conditions that the military has looked at. And again, the US Navy has done a great deal of research. And this is a kind of a macho superstition that, I can get tougher. I can, put off the heat. It's okay. I'll make it. I just got to work for another hour. But that's not really the case. It's difficult to prepare for and to tough something like this out, and it'll sneak up on you. So with that said, let's go through some case studies, some stats, regulations, and guidance, and see what this holds. So I started off the course with a couple of heat stress case studies. There are a lot of them, but I just chose a few to sort of drive a point home. So this is the first one, occurred in 2006. The ambient conditions were 90 degrees Fahrenheit, 21% humidity, which isn't that hot, high humidity. Once you get up into the 40s and 50s, you're starting to get to high humidity. This is not that bad yet. So this was a Department of Energy Security Protection Officer training competition. So it was a participant that suffered the heat injury. They went down and they were hospitalized for 8 days. Now consider this. If you are asked to be on the competition team, you're probably in pretty good shape, right? So they're not just going to be putting somebody on this team that's right off the couch. So this happened to a very fit person, okay? And you can see there's a photo of some of the garb that they put on when they're doing these competitions. Here's another case study, happened in 2004, pretty hot ambient temperature, 98 degrees, worker recently back from surgery. They weren't acclimated, no training on heat stress, complained throughout the day about heat and dizziness. So I got a lot of background on this case study. The person, it was in a small, like mom and pop contractor that was working on a Department of Energy site. And because of that, they were able to slip through a lot of the normal things that a larger contractor would be required to do at the time when this happened. And there was just a handful of workers. And this one worker kept going inside the office buildings where the water cooler was. And when the event happened, the investigation showed that this worker who suffered this actually went and was complaining to other people in the office building where they were around the water cooler, saying he's not feeling well, feeling nauseous, just doesn't think he's doing too well today, feels sick. And it included a supervisor that just happened to be walking by in the outside area that this person mentioned that he wasn't feeling well too. And the supervisor let it go. So a lot of people actually had some information that this was happening. So what happened was they were taking off some trim from an outdoor office units, like these mobile office buildings, and passed out and fell off the ladder and struck his head. Died from head trauma, but the medical examiner was able to actually determine that this person died of actual heat stress, and it was the heat stress that caused the fall and then ultimately died of head trauma. Some of the other details about this: the person was back from surgery. This wasn't really discussed well, and they were also on medication, which increased the likelihood of heat intolerance. And we're going to learn in this class that some medications don't go so well in hot environments. So this was an unfortunate case study. Here's another one, 2006. We've got a pretty wide range here, 82 to 105 degrees Fahrenheit with humidity, which is pretty high, 46 to 56. So this was something that was going on through the day, started in the morning. 27-year-old construction laborer, pretty good shape, was doing pipe laying, not acclimated. So this is somebody who is new to this kind of hot heat environment, and suffered a heat stroke and died. Last case study, July 2016, Camp Pendleton, which I believe is in California. It was a hot day. The unknown temperature and relative humidity was reported with this case study. 28-year-old Marine, which was a competitive lifter, ran marathons, very good shape, perfect PT test score. When they took him in, he had 109 degree Fahrenheit internal body temperature. At 105, you are at severe risk for brain damage. I have no idea how this person survived with 109 degree internal body temperature. Suffered heat stroke, was in a 2-week coma, and required a liver replacement. So the liver damage was enough where it required a liver replacement. The fact that he could speak and things like that after this occurred was amazing. Again, incredibly high. So I just showed, a handful of case studies that this affects all different kinds of folks, right? You can be in good shape. So who does this normally affect? When I say, heat stroke or heat stress, who usually comes to mind when you hear that? Any thoughts?
Construction workers, athletes.
Yep, athletes. Yep, usually athletes, the very old folks, people with underlying medical conditions. I think another football player just died last year or this year from heat stroke, right? This is what people typically think of. But what about these folks? You mentioned construction workers, right? Farm workers, outdoor workers, people that might work indoors in a potentially high heat environment. So that football player, the track person there, do those folks do a lot of work, like metabolic work, right? Yeah. How about these folks? Does it take a lot of energy to do these jobs? Absolutely. We're going to see that the energy that we create actually is going to add to our heat strain. So heat, it's the greatest cause of weather-related deaths. So this gives examples of weather fatalities for 1 year in red, 10-year average, and a 30-year average. Now, if you were to look at a 50-year average, it would even be more telling. because any given year you can have something outpace something else. But if you start to look at large swaths of time, we start to see things that come to the forefront. So we see the 30-year average for heat-related fatalities is the highest average at 138. As the global climate continues to warm, heat-related deaths have increased. This is from the EPA and a number of other organizations that study climate change, global warming, heat-related fatalities, and extreme weather occurrences have concluded the same. So the yearly average of 702 heat-related deaths occurred in the US between 2004 and 2018. So this is about a 14 to 15-year period. You know, that's a fairly high number for something that is controllable. So on average, 415 of them are the underlying cause. So this means that it was the heat itself which caused the fatality. The other 287 from that annual average is from a contributing factor. So maybe the person had a heart condition and the high heat exacerbated that heart condition and they went into cardiac arrest. Between 1999 and 2003, there were almost 3,500 deaths in the US from extreme heat. And this one's pretty telling. I don't know if folks remember this. Back in 2003, nearly 15,000 related heat deaths in France, just in France. That's a lot. 7 straight days of 104-degree-plus temperatures. And throughout Europe, they had nearly 40,000 heat deaths. So this is significant. Now look what happened, and this is just for France. We can see this black line here. These here are what you would expect for an average temperature based on some, historical data for France in the months of June, July, and August. These were the actual temperatures in orange here that occurred during that heat wave. So we see, in August, we're spiking up, 105. So this was a significant heat wave. And it contributed to those fatalities. So now let's start looking at work, okay? And again, you gotta keep this in mind that heat is a home issue, it's a work issue, and they're gonna mesh together. So occupational heat fatalities, if folks took the DOT heat stress webinar that Ken, Bruce, and myself did the other day, Bruce had this on as one of his slides, right? It's pretty telling. This here is a number of fatalities that occurred between 2003 and 2008. And the blue people here are for construction workers. So the total was 196 fatalities. Of those, 70 were construction workers. Again, these are all preventable. What that comes out to be for the total deaths is about 11 deaths every day from a preventable disease due to heat. If we look at just the construction heat-related fatalities, they make up 36% or the lion's share because all the rest of the occupational fatalities are all other industry. So construction workers take the brunt of heat-related fatalities. Again, just some more slides that I added here from Bruce's presentation. Nearly all of them were men. A lot of them were younger than you would think, right? So less than 55 years of age had the bulk. And most of the fatalities were white, from white non-Hispanic construction workers. So this was a study that was from Sudan, from CPWR, that was recently released in 2019. And they determined that US construction workers are at a high risk of heat-related deaths, and that this risk has increased with climate change over time. So this is just another issue that construction workers are going to be taking the brunt from, unless we can control it and we can do something about it, which we can. So here's some locations of outdoor worker heat-related fatalities between 2008 and 14. This is from OSHA's heat map, and if you click on these, you can actually go and it'll bring up the case studies. What do we notice here? Where are the bulk of these fatalities around the country? Anybody? What sticks out about this map?
They're in the southern states, most of them.
Yep. Yep. Like, you know, I would consider this a high heat environment. If folks can see my pointer here. High heat environment. You know, I'm surprised there's not more in Florida. But if you notice too, there's some spots that, you know, I mean, Wisconsin, Michigan, right? Illinois might not be considered high heat, but you can have heat waves in some of these places. This was an OSHA complaint that I found interesting, you know, when I was doing research on this. So this is a psychologist that works for the Department of Corrections in California, and, you know, was trying to get their HVAC system fixed. And, you know, the quote that struck me was, "I'm sure the quality of treatment goes down when you're sweating, sitting across the room from a felon who's sweating," she said. So imagine, you know, this doesn't just affect construction workers. It doesn't just affect folks who are outside. You can be indoors. I mean, my personal example here, my terrible office. If I don't have my AC running, it's terrible to work in this place. It sucks, okay? So you could be in an indoor environment and you can still have a high heat risk condition, right? As is exampled here by this psychiatrist that was working in a correctional facility. No air conditioning. If you're in Southern California, or if you're in, you know, Florida or one of the southern states, it can be an issue if you don't got tempered air. So one of the things you want to try to do is remove any preconceptions you have that heat stress is only going to affect people that are outside, you know, in a southern state, or that are doing, you know, serious physical labor, things like that. Heat stress can occur, you know, to really any environment type of work. So here's some causal factors that affect heat stress. You know, age and weight, physical fitness, acclimation, metabolism, workload. So here I got a, you know, photo of an IUPAT, you know, flooring worker. You know, I've never ran one of those things before, you know, but I'd imagine, you know, it's going to take some effort to operate one of those. I don't know if that's a buffer or a sander. So workload, what kind of work are you doing is going to add to your heat stress. Use of alcohol or drugs, medical conditions that you might have, type of clothing worn. So here's another example of a worker wearing, you know, that's a Tyvek coated suit, right? That's going to add to your heat stress. And then if you've had a prior heat injury, and this is something to consider. If you have a clinically defined heat related injury, you are more likely to be susceptible to suffering another heat related injury in the future, even if you're acclimated. So you don't want to get one of these. Even if you survive, you know, and you're okay, you are going to be more susceptible to one going forward. Here's some info from the Cal OSHA on their findings of heat-related illnesses for 1 year. Death occurred in 54% of the cases. 84% involved outdoor work exclusively, so that still leaves 16% of these cases was indoors. 92% involved moderate or strenuous work, and we're going to look at classifying these levels of light, you know, medium, moderate type of work, because it's very important as we go through this course. Average humidity wasn't very humid, 29%. Work was in direct sunlight most of the time. Shade was available most of the time. Water was available all the time. And 78% of the workers showed inadequate fluid consumption. So this is something that we've actually found quite a bit in the literature. Even when water is available, folks don't drink it. Now, what are some reasons you think that might happen? Any guesses as to why, even if water is available, people might not drink it?
You get barked at for stopping.
Yep. You sort of summed it up. It's a workplace culture. So if a worker does not feel comfortable to take the time they need to go get a cup of water, they're probably not going to do it. Other issues are if you don't have good water. I know it sounds silly, but there's been studies that show that people enjoy the taste of water more if it's cold. All right, so if you've got good cold water, people are more likely to drink it. But really, it comes down to whether or not there's a culture where workers feel safe to go get a drink.
Hey, Bernie, people on construction sites using the water jugs for something else other than drinking water.
Yep. Anybody else want to chime in about this issue? All right, so just put this in the back of your mind. If it's laid out, if a worker has a work site heat stress illness prevention program, this should be addressed. And if that's true, workers should be trained on it. And if that's true, supervisors should be trained on it. And there should be a culture that allows the controls to take place. And we'll talk about that a little more as we go on. This was from SHARP, which was, oh boy, this comes out of the state of Washington. I always forget this acronym. But they investigated heat-related illnesses in Washington state workers from workers' comp claims filed between 95 and 2004. And look they found almost matches up with our fatalities, right, that we looked at. 150 claims out of the total, so about 34%. But look it wasn't just construction workers, right? Public administration. So these might be folks from firefighters, police officers, could be teachers, librarians, whatever, 16%. Manufacturing, 10%. And then agriculture, forestry, fishing, and hunting, 7%. What agencies protect workers from heat-related illnesses? So we've got OSHA, we've got the Canadian Coalition of Occupational Safety and Health, Department of Energy, NIOSH CDC, Washington State, we've got California State as well, ACGIH. So there's other organizations, and we're going to get into just touching on some of these. If you are delivering this course in a specific state, what I recommend is that you go on, you find out if that state has any specific health and safety regulations related to heat. Cal OSHA actually was a pioneer. Note to self, I'll probably update this at some point and just put a slide or two for California in here. What does OSHA say? No heat stress standard. OSHA will cite for this under the general duty clause. In fact, Section 3, Chapter 4 of the OSHA Technical Manual does cover heat stress and its investigation. The most recent update of it, which I reviewed last week, it's a pretty good piece for doing heat stress assessments. But think about it. Why don't we have a heat stress standard? It affects potentially everybody, right? No heat stress standard yet. OSHA does have a campaign to prevent heat illness in outdoor workers. This originated from Cal OSHA's Water Rest Shade program. And again, this is targeted to outdoor work, but again, you can suffer heat stress illnesses from indoor work as well. OSHA does have a recommendation for employer developing a written plan specifically geared towards heat issues. Some of the things on it: who's going to provide daily oversight, how new workers will gradually develop heat tolerance, temporary workers. So, this is an issue. If you're a migratory worker, if you're a temporary worker, a day worker, there's no way to really track folks like this, right? Whether or not they're acclimated to that type of heat environment. What about returning workers? What if you were off for vacation, or maybe you were ill and you were off for a few days? So it's got to address that as well. Implements adequate and effective first aid and emergency medical measures for heat illnesses. Going to list some controls on there and implement them. Covers heat stress assessment, discusses national weather advisory issue, right? And so how is that going to be incorporated into that job site? Heat stress risk assessment, and then training for workers and supervisors. So these are things that OSHA recommends that an employer do to implement a program like this. It's not a requirement, but it is a best practice. And, definitely recommended to do. OSHA does have a smartphone app, both for Android and the iPhone, calculates the heat index. It'll give you a risk level and gives you some precautions to take. This is another opportunity that you could do if you wanted to throw in another small group activity for your classes. You could get people to download this app. You can maybe even give directions to do it beforehand when they come to class, go through it. Canada has various heat stress rules depending upon jurisdiction. So this is just a screenshot of their page. And if we were to scroll down, it shows all the jurisdictions and gives examples of their heat stress rules. So if you're in Canada and you're going to be delivering heat stress training, you know, go to the jurisdiction that you're going to be delivering the training in, and you know, find out what those rules are, and then I would present on those rules. If you work on a Department of Energy site, and I know that IUPAT workers do get to some of these sites, the Department of Energy actually has some rules that go beyond OSHA. So one is for their radiological control standard. It actually discusses heat stress as it applies to radiological control work. So let's say if you were gonna, you know, suit up an anti-seize or a different level of PPE to remove some contaminated coating from concrete or a surface, that would cover you for, you know, heat-related illnesses to some degree. The NIOSH CDC created guidance for activities conducted in hot weather, a criteria for recommended standard. Just so you know, the first one they did was in 1986. So what is this? Let's see, more than 20 years later. What are we, 24 years later? God, we still don't have an OSHA standard. The most updated one is 2016. I did include this in the packet to you. I suggest that you read through this. It is an excellent resource for understanding heat stress. Covers everything from different heat-related illnesses, first aid, measurements, controls, things like that. And this is included with the packet that you have access to. But again, you know, NIOSH's recommendation, right? It's not a law, unfortunately. The state of Washington has a few requirements. They look at temperature, radiant heat, or ambient temperature and humidity combinations. And this is right out of their language. Workers shall be afforded protection by use of adequate controls, methods, or procedures, or protective clothing. So they do have, you know, some fairly strong language in there. It looks for outdoor heat exposure. So they have outdoor temperature action levels, employer and employee responsibilities, looks at drinking water, responds to signs and symptoms of heat-related illnesses, and they look at information and training. So this applies to outdoor work being done from May 1st to September 30th, and these are what their action levels are. So this requirement would take action if it's during those months, if you're wearing any kind of clothing, if it's 89 degrees or above, double layer woven clothes, 77, and so forth. So, you know, Washington State has some pretty good rule for heat stress. First aid for wildland firefighters is covered as well for Washington State. And they also look at folks who wear different types of protective clothing. Now we get into ACGIH. So again, show you my one prop here. So the ACGIH TLV, this is their recommended threshold limit value for heat stress. If you're going to be, you know, actually, even if you're not doing training just on heat stress, I recommend that you get an ACGIH TLV. It's a great book to have. They're published every, I don't know if it's every year, every couple of years. If you're a member of ACGIH, you get a copy. That's complimentary. If not, you have to buy them. I think they're 40, 50 bucks, something like that. So what this looks at is ACGIH recommends worker removal if sustained heart rate is above 180, accounting for age. The core body temp goes above 101.3 degrees Fahrenheit. For folks who are medically selected and acclimated, or if you're not selected and unacclimated, if it goes above 100.4. Recovery heart rate after 1 minute of peak activity is greater than 121 beats per minute, or if you've got different signs and symptoms that you're suffering under heat strain. Profuse sweating over several hours, weight loss over a shift of greater than 1.5% body weight. So for me, around 194, so, you know, around 2.5%. I should say 2.5 pounds if I lose that during sweating. right? During a work day, that would be a grounds for removing myself from that environment. The only way you're going to know that is a scale. How many people here have been at work and have actually seen a scale set up for monitoring weight loss of water on the job? Anybody?
Hey, Bernie, on my last job here in Las Vegas, I actually did that, but it was something I learned to do. But it wasn't me taking the measurements. I taught the crew what to look for, and the crew was doing their own measurements. I just bought them all a scale.
Okay. Yeah, I've actually never seen one implemented, and I've done a lot of work on Department of Energy sites where they're typically out in the desert, very hot, and they're always wearing lots of clothing, you know, to protect themselves from the chemicals or radiological material. And this is another one that you wouldn't know unless you're specifically, you know, having someone monitor for it. So a 24-hour urinary sodium excretion, less than 50 millimoles. So this is a way to look at if the salts in your body are diluted, right? And you're not left with what you should have. All right, so that's the end of the first section. Any comments or questions? The best thing that you can do is broadcast all the stuff that's out there that you know, folks can look at to try to protect themselves from some form of, you know, guidance or writing. If you're in a state that has an actual rule or regulation, great. If not, you're left up to guidance. Department of Energy sites, they actually will implement the most protective values as long as it's not related to radiation. So in this case, they actually defer to the ACGIH TLVs. So if you're working on a Department of Energy site, you've got that working for you. But otherwise, you know, try to give students the swath of what's out there as far as what should be done, right? And this is what employers should be doing to protect their workforce. Any comments or questions? All right, I think we have another poll question. Nicole, if I forget when these are coming up, just throw them up on the screen.
Uh-oh. You got it.
I won't be offended. It's better than throwing a shoe at me or
We
something.
have a question from Mike. What's this packet he keeps referencing? I didn't get it in anyone else.
Let's see. I will defer to Nicole, Alice, Donna, or Monisha. Where would they find the resources for trainers?
All right, Nicole will take it. Everything, so all of your handouts, Bernie, the plethora of information, if you will, has all been uploaded in 1146 heat stress under the course materials. There was a lot of information in there, and I didn't want to send it out prior to the class to distract everybody where you would get overwhelmed. But all these resources that Bernie's referring to is in the LMS already for you. And we can go over that at the end of class as well, but it's all there.
Perfect. Yeah, no, I didn't shy away. I gave everybody a lot of stuff. And if you go through those materials, you will be comfortable and confident teaching this class. And then I've got some other stuff in there. You know, there's some stuff that OSHA promoted, like heat stress awareness cards, things like that, just as FYIs. And we'll show some other stuff that's on the slides that might not be included in the packet that you could go get access to just by following the links on the slides and stuff. All right, so here we go. We've got, have you ever worked for an employer that had a heat stress prevention plan? 31% said yes, 54 said no, and 15 said sort of. All right, yep, I've never actually seen a heat stress prevention plan in place. Those of you that have, good for you. How would you bring this up? So let's say if you give training to, you know, our members, and all of a sudden they're on a job site, they say, hey, you know, boss, where's our heat stress prevention plan, man? I noticed that we're sweating the moment we get on site. And the boss says, we don't have one. What should that worker do?
Call someone.
Call who?
Call somebody, like an agent or somebody.
Yep, good. Yeah, there's, there's every union has some method of reporting, whether it's a site steward, somebody. If, they've got to know that there's a whole union behind them that's got their back. So if, they take any, not this training, but any training, and they find that something is awry and not right, they've got to have a comfortable vehicle, right, to bring this up. They might not feel comfortable bringing it up to a direct supervisor if that supervisor's not, a member of the union. So this is something that you might want to be ready for if somebody asks you a question. All right, let's get into the next thing. Ooh. Why can't I advance? There we go. All right, so heat balance is necessary for the body in order to prevent harm. So I notice heat balance, I'm starting to heat up in my office, so I might have to throw the air conditioner on. We'll see. So we've got some stuff here on the left side of the scale. We've got environmental effects. So we've got radiant heat, which is what? What's radiant heat?
Somebody might be welding and that steel gets hot and it's giving off the heat.
Yeah, good. Yeah, so radiant heat could be like that. Hot metal, your stove, it could be sun, right?
It could be the reflection of the glass on a building that heats up the materials that you're working with.
Exactly. So depending upon what, your craft is, you might actually have more of an issue with radiant heat than other folks.
This is Ken, just a quick story. Here in Las Vegas at City Center, when they built the buildings, their windows are concaved, and it was actually burning cups and people down at the pool.
Yeah. So a magnifying glass. Yeah. How about conductive heat? What do you think that is?
That's if something gets hot and if you're in one room and the room next to you is really hot, and it passes through the wall, that conduction, where the heat gets conducted through.
So it's going to be passed from surface to surface or object to object. So conduction would be an example of you putting your hand on the stove burner or your hand on a hot railing, or maybe you sit on a cold bench and that bench is actually receiving conductive heat from you.
Yeah.
So convection is where the air is very hot, and that is going to carry heat around it. So, if you have a convection oven, it typically will cook things more thoroughly because that air is going to be able to circulate around the food that you're trying to cook, right? So we've got these environmental factors of heat: radiant heat, conductive heat, where you're touching something. Imagine if you're leaning against something, right, out on the job site. And then we've got convective heat, so hot air moving around.
Can I add one thing is that radiant is that you also, when women work construction, we have hot flashes. So if you're in the extreme heat and you're having hot flashes, your body gets even hotter. So we're susceptible to it as far as that goes.
So that moves into the metabolic issue, right? So besides having an environmental issue affecting our body, we've got a body issue affecting our body. So let's get into that. So we got a metabolic heat load that occurs as well. So BMR and RMR, this is basal metabolic rate and resting metabolic rate. It's just the calories that you're burning sitting around doing your daily activities, right? Not doing work. I shouldn't say daily activities. It's your body sitting around not doing work, at rest. And that is going to create some heat. Then you've got thermogenesis. So thermogenesis is basically the dissipation of heat from everything that you're doing, okay? And that's actually, it's a negative effect because it doesn't get distributed well. Then you've got muscular activity. You've got postural. So postural muscles are things that are working against gravity. So I'm having a postural load right now. If I stood up, it's going to be a little more, right? If you are on a ladder, it's going to be a little more. ADL, so daily activities. So, your common things that you might do, walking upstairs, walking to your car, carrying groceries, etc. We can also look at, workload as well as a subset of that. and then exercise. And so if you're going to do any kind of exercise activities. So anything that might happen in the body, Deborah, you mentioned, a female hot flash. This is something that's a metabolic process in the body where they are actually going to produce excessive heat. And this is going to go for anything that you might do, okay? Whether you're just sitting in a chair or you're doing construction work. Exercising for me, it's important. If I'm doing grappling, right? And if I'm going to try to use my strength and outpower somebody instead of using good technique, I'm going to probably tire out faster because what am I doing? I'm having to burn more fuel to feed my muscles to implement my force, as opposed to relaxing and using, technique. So that's going to create not just a depletion of energy, which does affect us during, high heat environments. It's also going to create excessive heat, and that's going to, make it not go so well for me as well. So just imagine all the activities that you do as a construction worker and how this scale, is going to get tipped to that left side. Well, how are we going to balance? We've got the stuff on the right. Evaporation. So as your body's heating up, it's going to dump heat into the blood. That blood is going to go to the surface of your skin, and hopefully it's going to get distributed to the air through radiant heat loss. If you've got a high heat load and that's not doing it enough for you, you're going to sweat, and that sweat's going to go out to the surface of your skin, going to carry that heat, and as long as the humidity is low enough, it's going to evaporate, taking the heat away. Water is the world's greatest heat sink. It is unbelievable. It's got a great capacity to store and remove heat. And that's our greatest way of cooling ourselves. Conductive heat loss. So I gave the example of you sitting on a cold bench, right? You're going to actually transfer heat to that cold surface. And then convective. So convective is the blood's close to the surface of your skin. It's going to distribute heat that way. With air moving around you that's cooler than you. If the air is not cooler than you, you're not going to have convective cooling, okay? And that's important because people ask, well, what about a fan? Well, a fan is great as long as the air is going to be colder than your body temperature, and as long as the air has low humidity so that your sweat can actually evaporate. If it's the opposite of what I just said, you're actually going to be adding the balance the other way. And you're going to be adding more heat stress to your body to deal with. This is a simplified heat balance equation. S is heat storage rate. So if this builds up too fast, your body can't handle it, you're in trouble. M is metabolic rate. This is from all activity, whether it's resting, walking, working, exercising, whatever. Digesting that lunch you just had. Radiant heat is R, convective heat exchange is C, and evaporation rate of heat is E. And those things, can have different values depending upon how it's working on the body and what the environmental factors are. So what is a heat stress, heat strain, and heat-related illness? They're all tied to thermal stress on the body. And we're not considering cold stress right now. We're only looking at heat stress. So this is what the ACGIH defines. Heat stress is the net heat load which a worker may be exposed from the combined contributions of metabolic cost of work, environmental factors, and cooling requirements. So, heat stress can kind of act like a volcano. If you've got a job that's got risk to heat stress, your body is going to go into heat strain, which is its ability to try to deal with that. Then you can have a number of heat-related illness, the last one, which is going to be heat stroke. NIOSH cautions that workers suffering from heat stress are also more prone to suffer other injuries, right? So if you are under heat stress and you are, I know a lot of work that APAT members do might be up on ladders or at heights. Kind of requires dexterity and mental acuity, right? Just to know where you are. This could be affected. I don't know if anybody's a Jimmy Buffett fan, but this is one of my prior Jimmy Buffett concerts, which I sadly won't be going to this year. Thank you, COVID-19. Heat strain. So this is the overall physiological response resulting from heat stress. So here your body is saying, hey, I'm heating up. I've got to do something with it because my organs don't like it. Heat-related illnesses are going to occur if your body can't do it. So once your body's ability to dump the heat load starts to max out, you are going to potentially suffer a heat-related illness. So what signs and symptoms do you think you might notice if your body's getting too hot?
Dizziness.
Dizziness, yep. What else?
Extreme thirst.
Yep.
You stop sweating.
Oh boy, yeah, if you stop sweating, 911 better be on the way. Yep. What else?
Muscle cramps.
Muscle cramps, good. Anything else? There's a number of them. What about if you're starting to look red? Right? Remember I said that one of the things that your body's going to do is send the blood to the right underneath the surface of your skin. So what happens is the blood is not always evenly distributed in your body. Your body can work without your help to send it where it's most needed. In the case of heat strain, it's going to try to pull most of it towards the surface of your skin, or I should say most of it. I should say direct more of it, as opposed to your gut and core, because it's trying to dump the heat. If you're eating a nice meal, your body's actually going to pull the blood more towards your abdominal region to digest all that delicious food you just ate, which ain't so good for fighting heat stress. That's why you don't want to have food and then go exercise, right? You know, that whole thing your parents used to tell you, wait an hour before you eat and go swim. Well, the reason why is you might cramp up. So let's look at what happens when the body is placed under heat strain. So during both rest and activity, the human body tries to maintain an internal temperature of 98.6. So we see 98.6 there on the left in this bulb, and our blood volume. So the amount of volume of blood that's in our system is where it should be. After 1 or 2 hours of some hot work, hot weather and some hot, hard, heavy work, the heated blood is pumped towards the skin surface where the body heat is trying to transfer to the environment. So what's happening now is our blood is still pretty much where it should be. We're not sweating yet, right? The heat's doing its, the body is doing its best to dump the heat without having to produce sweat. If you continue in that environment, doing that kind of activity, the body's going to say, well, we need more help, so let's start sweating. So as you sweat, your blood volume is going to start to drop because conservation of mass, if you're not putting anything in your body and you're sweating liquid out, right, there's going to be less left. And that's going to be at a detriment to you as things go on if you don't replace those fluids. So after 2 to 3 hours of this and you're starting to lose fluid, you're going to have, endurance loss. You're going to start to feel uncomfortable. I want to stop this activity. The hell with this. You might start to feel hot or thirsty. If it goes farther than that, right, if you don't stop what you're doing and attend to it, now we start to get into more of the heat-related illness issues. Headache, muscle fatigue, loss of strength, accuracy. You might look at heat cramps. You might have heat rash, things like that. You might start to feel sick. And now our blood volume is starting to shrink. So we don't have enough in our system to do what we normally should do. Now, don't forget, as you're losing blood volume and you're sweating, you're trying to dump heat. Well, guess what? If you're trying to work, what else does your body need? It needs fuel, it needs oxygen, it needs nutrients to keep pushing the paint roller, right? To install your glass, to do all that stuff. Your body cannot do everything, right? We can train it a little bit to handle some of this load, but not a lot, okay? So at some point, you might go into heat exhaustion or God forbid, heat stroke, if you're not, removed from that area and that workload. So I mentioned this before, somebody with a past heat-related illness may have limited tolerance to heat stress. You might require more time to be acclimated, and you might not ever be able to tolerate heat the same way that you did before, or physical exertion. So, there's a way to do this, appropriately. For work, we've got some recommended guidelines for acclimating people and bringing them into a high heat environment. For exercise, there's also methods. We use science for that as well. When I first started, doing the Spartan races, I always used to joke. Longest one I did was 17 miles on Killington in Vermont. But I joke, I'm a sprinter. I hate distance running, absolutely hate it. The first day that I trained for one of these 4 years ago, I went out and I did a mile. And one of my friends said, "What was your time?" I said, "I finished." Right? So I had to gradually get into doing this stuff. The same thing for work, okay? And just because you're used to doing, let's say, glazing work in New York, well, what if you move to San Francisco or LA? You've got a different environment now. It might be the same kind of work, but the environmental factors are different. You still need to adjust to that. So these are different clinically diagnosable heat-related illnesses if your heat stress isn't controlled. So heat fatigue, rash, cramps, exhaustion, syncope, stroke, and rhabdomyolysis. Rhabdomyolysis. So this is a real fun one that causes damage to the body, and we'll look at this. So the problem is you don't have to go down this in a nice line. You can be under heat fatigue, all of a sudden you have heat rashes, and then you pass out, syncope. It doesn't have to go in order. You can actually jump from one to the end, right, without knowing it. Be aware of signs and symptoms of heat fatigue, including impaired performance, skilled sensor motors are starting to go. You're having mental debility, or, your job vigilance is going down. There's no treatment for heat fatigue except removing that person from the environment and letting them rest up. This isn't necessarily a heat-related illness, but it's a precursor to what's coming up. So we want to include heat fatigue in here. Heat rash is the most common heat-related illness in hot work environments. It's one of the first signs of concern after fatigue. Red papules might come. Looks like your typical rash. Basically, it's a diaper rash, right? We've got restrictive clothing and you're sweating and it's not able to evaporate. It typically occurs in spots where your clothing is, rubbing, or it's restricting sweat from evaporating. This is going to reduce heat tolerance. And by the way, when you have heat rash, you're also more susceptible to chemical exposures. Treatments can include, working in a cooler environment, reducing humidity, keep the affected area dry. You can use certain powders, calamine lotion, corticosteroid lotions, etc., to try to reduce the rash. But really, you've got to prevent that moisture from being trapped. Then we get into heat cramps. So you're performing some hard physical labor. You're sweating a lot. You're losing your electrolytes. And cramps can be caused by too much or too little salt. You might have heard of the phrase runner's cramp. It's where, people in marathons and they're doing high distance training are only continuously drinking water during their event. And what's happening is the little salt and electrolytes that's left behind. And when I mean salt, I don't just mean sodium. I mean sodium, potassium, the other necessary salts in our body. So they're just drinking water and they're diluting the salt that they have left behind. And so that's going to cause significant cramps. Salts go in and out of our body, and it's very important to keep a balance of them. In fact, fun fact, if you ever want to be a hit at your next dinner party, just ask somebody, how would you rather drown, in fresh water or salt water? Any ideas? I'd rather go in fresh water because you will die of an electrolyte imbalance and you'll have a heart attack much faster than you will drown of suffocating in salt water from not getting oxygen. Because in fresh water, once it gets into your lungs, there's a difference of concentration between the fresh water and what you've got inside your body. All those salts are going to go through your membranes into that water in your lungs. So what we do and what we put in our body makes a big difference in how our system can handle heat strain. You want to get removed, again, a lot of this is the same, get removed from that high heat environment and activity with rest, water with salt replacement if you've actually got clinically diagnosed cramps. And this could be, The naval manual that I've uploaded or that you've got access to, you know, they've done a lot of research on this. They do recommend, you know, electrolyte replacement drinks that have a higher ratio of potassium to just sodium. Electrolyte replacement liquids are effective, and you've got to find a way of putting that back into your body if you're losing a lot through sweat. Heat exhaustion, now we're getting into like a real danger zone. So it's caused by the loss of a lot of body fluids and important salts, usually exposed to heat for long amounts of time. Fainting can be associated, so heat syncope, you know, if people are under heat exhaustion, they might faint. So look, you can suffer a debilitating head injury by falling on the same level that you're at. So if you faint and you fall to the ground that you are on, strike your head on concrete, hit a table on the way down, right? So there are other injuries that can occur besides those related to heat strain on the body if you happen to faint. Some signs of heat exhaustion: headaches, dizziness, lightheadedness, mood changes, irritability. You know, it's no fun, you know, being under significant physiological stress from activity when you're hot. I'm very grumpy when I'm usually at the end of my training session, some of my training sessions. I don't want somebody to ask how I'm doing. It looks like I'm doing terrible. Don't ask me. So if you notice changes in how your coworkers are behaving, you know, it could be that they're suffering from heat strain. You start to feel sick, you know, your skin starts to get cool or pale. Maybe the red color that you used to have is going away. You know, so there's a bunch of different signs that may be a precursor to you're in real trouble. Heat treatment, you know, remove from the environment again, give fluid replacements, adequate rest. This is something, if you think that you're suffering from heat exhaustion, you should be diagnosed. Heat syncope is fainting. So basically, remember how I said the body is going to regulate where the blood goes to do certain jobs? If you are trying to cool yourself, not enough blood's going to your brain to deliver oxygen. So if this happens, you might pass out. It's unpredictable. It's just going to happen. You can't catch yourself when you're fainting. It just doesn't happen, right? You pass out. Acclimated workers actually have a little bit reduced risk of fainting. So that's another benefit for acclimating workers to high heat environments. Now we get into heat stroke. So this is a medical emergency. Occurs in the body system. It says, I'm done. I've tried to dump the heat. You have refused to remove me from that hot environment and physical activity. I'm going to show you. That's it. I'm done. So your body can no longer dump the heat. There's a lot of stuff that goes on to bring a body that's under heat strain to the level of heat stroke, and it's not good. So it's very difficult to predict. And remember, I said you can jump from heat exhaustion to heat stroke. You can have heat rash. Next thing you know, you're sitting down on the curb and you're not sweating anymore. Here's some signs and symptoms: confusion, irrational behavior, loss of consciousness, convulsions. Lack of sweating, hot, dry skin, abnormal high body temperature, which you wouldn't know, right, unless you've got a thermometer and you've got some way of taking their temperature or your temperature. If the body's too high, body temp's too high, it can cause death. And again, brain damage can start at 105 internal temperature. Pulse is strong and rapid. Again, it's trying to dump heat, but it can't, right? So it's going to try to do its best. It's not going to work. And the pupils get pinpointed, very small. Treatment includes EMS immediately. If you think someone's suffering from heat stroke, 911. Move the worker to a shady, cool area. Try to get them out of their clothing. Skin should be wetted, cooled in an area in a way that you can actually get air around their skin. Fanning them with something. If you've got access to a fan, great. If there's any way that you can increase evaporative cooling. Ice packs help. Fluid should be replaced as soon as possible if they're awake and it's safe to do so. They might get sick when you're doing that. You have to be prepared for that. So this is example of treating somebody that just suffered heat stroke after a race, a distance race. This is from the Journal of Emergency Medicine. The Navy has conducted research with this. They were the first folks that I saw advocate for repetitively dumping somebody in a tub of iced water. And I don't know about you, but how likely are you to have a tub of iced water at work? So this is something that you have to prepare for, and this should never be needed for somebody at work. Look, if you're on your own time and you want to push yourself through an environment, all right, right? You pay an entry fee. Typically that comes with an insurance premium. Usually it's $20 for, you know, marathons and things like that. And they're going to have services like this. But no worker should have to be placed in a predicament that would require something like this. This is preventable, right? Rhabdomyopathy, rhabdo. I'll come back and I'll get the pronunciation of this. Let's try it one more time. Rhabdomyolysis, rhabdo. So basically what happens is your muscle fibers break and they leak into your bloodstream, and all the toxic byproducts of that, including proteins, large proteins, you know, other byproducts leak into the bloodstream and get distributed. You basically have somewhat of a toxic shock to that, and it's very bad for the kidney. You might have heard of, if people like looked at CrossFit and stuff like that, it's associated with people who might go crazy with doing CrossFit and CrossFit and pushing their bodies to extreme limits constantly. You know, but it's associated with other extreme intense workouts. And what happens is your body breaks. One of the telltale signs is, along with muscle cramping, you've got discolored tea or cola-like urine, right? Because you've got an issue with stuff coming through into your kidneys. Treatment: stop activity, increase hydration, and you want to get medical care for this if you think you have it, and tell them, say, look, you know, can I be checked for rhabdo? I was doing this at work, or I was doing this as a physical activity. All of a sudden, you know, geez, I feel like I was really hot, and I just didn't feel the same as after I normally do that kind of work, whether it be, you know, work or exercise or something. Go get checked for it. Heat stress can lead to an increase in other safety, health, and job-related issues, reduction in work performance, increased accidents, reproductive problems, heart-lung strain, and it can act synergistically with chemicals. This was an example of a study that NASA did. So that temperature increases, work quality is negatively affected. So we've got just ambient temperatures here. And we can see starting at 85, the loss in work accuracy really starts to go down. 40% loss of accuracy at 95 degrees Fahrenheit, they logged a 700% loss in work accuracy. Now, if you're, you know, doing space shuttle work, that might not be the thing you want to have happen to you, right? If you suffer some kind of a, you know, work reduction accuracy like this under a heat load. Heat stress affects helicopter pilot job skills. So a study was done in '93 of Israeli helicopter pilots. The number of pilots they looked at was 500. So this is a pretty good sized study. And they found a dose response relationship. As temperature goes up, ability to soundly operate that helicopter goes down, right? So this is important to understand. If you are under heat strain, you're not going to be able to do your job as well. So think about this. Again, look at the high-risk environments that IUPAT members do their work in. Climbing on ladders, climbing on scaffolding, you know, up at high elevations, carrying heavy objects, things like that. Exposure to excess heat at work can increase the risk of having a baby with birth defects or lead to other reproductive problems. So this is something to consider. And again, this is another thing that goes not just at work, but at home life. So, you know, if you're pregnant, What kinds of things are you doing that might increase the heat strain on your body? Workers exposed to heat may also be increased risk of, other issues as well. And again, nothing good comes out of forcing your body, to do heavy work in high heat environments. This stuff is preventable. We talked about synergism already, depending upon, what kind of chemicals they might affect you differently under high heat environments or vice versa. Medical risk factors. So remember in the very beginning, we talked about underlying causes of fatality compared to contributing causes. So these are some underlying causes that will be affected by high heat environments and make you more apt to get a heat-related illness. This is adapted out of the Heat Stress Control and Heat Casualty Management Department of Defense book. It just looks at different drug or drug classes, and it looks at the potential mechanisms of action, how they might affect the body with heat stress, such as impaired sweating, liver, kidney damage, salt depletion, dehydration, things like that. So it's really important, if you've got workers, and again, we've got to have a work culture that allows for a worker to bring things up in a safe environment. So if a worker had, a surgery, or if they're put on, some kind of medication that might affect their ability to tolerate heat, they have to have some way to bring this out so that they're not negatively affected. And, I don't know what all work sites look like. So again, this is really a union kind of issue, right? We want to develop a safe work site to be able to do this. It's important. Let your students know if they've got an underlying condition, if they're taking a medication, check with their doctor. That could be a first place to start, to see if working in high heat environments is going to be affected by that. Okay, it's very important. Work-related construction factors also increase heat-related illnesses. So the tools and machinery that you're using, I gave the example of that, floor covering person in the beginning. If you're doing tools and work that's very heavy, it's going to affect your heat-related illness risk. Working on elevated surfaces, heavy workloads, the type of accommodations that you might have. Temporary employment. So again, if you're not, being tracked for heat tolerance, acclimation, etc. If you're working in direct sunlight, we've all heard that it's 10 degrees cooler in the shade. Yes, it is, right? So this is a method of control too. We'll talk about, in our last module. And PPE requirements. I can't say enough. If you put PPE on, depending upon what it is, it will significantly increase your risk to heat-related illnesses. Any other comments or questions? Anything that we can firm up that we went through? Nicole, do we have a poll for this session? Ah, look at that. My memory might be working somewhat. I was like 50% sure. All right, so has anyone had a heat-related illness either on the job or off the job? Well, Ken, this very non-accurate device is showing that my office is now 86.3. I'm at 65% relative humidity. That's not good for me. Let's see, has anyone had a heat? Okay, so yes, 45, no 45, not sure. Okay, yep. So I've had heat cramps once. It was miserable. Never had them again because I made sure that I took more than enough steps. I overcompensated. In fact, on some of my events, I started drinking pickle juice because it actually, the acid in pickle juice actually prevents one of the chemicals that your body produces that causes cramps. So what a delicious delicacy. Okay, we are at 3:20 right now. Why don't we take a 10-minute break? Come back at 3:32. We'll sign back on at 3:32, and we'll finish the last two modules, which includes our activity. Sound good? All right.
Sounds good, thanks.
That TLV, and also like the NIOSH one and other ones that we might see. I give a copy of an Army one here. In order to use the TLV, you have to characterize the metabolic workload, right? So how active are you? So here on the left, we've got a work category, and this was taken out of the OSHA field manual. So work category rest, it gives us a metabolic rate of 115 watts, example sitting. Light, 180 watts, and the watts isn't so much as important right now as the work category, and you being able to select an appropriate one. Light, sitting, standing, light arm hand work. We see, moderate work, normal walking, moderate lifting, heavy material handling, walking at a fast pace, and very heavy is pick and shovel work. There were a couple issues where there was a heat-related injury at a Department of Energy site, and I was asked by the union to review the issues and provide an expert opinion. And what it came down to was the supervisors appropriately assessed the heat stress values on the wet bulb globe temperature meter, but they did not assess this right. They did not contribute the correct workload. So these folks were putting themselves in awkward postures with sawzalls and other hand power tools and trying to cut through these really big metal support columns and posts and railings and things like that of all this very heavy equipment that was used to process plutonium fuel. And they classified that as light work. Now, I don't know if those supervisors ever picked up a sawzall and tried holding themselves in an awkward posture and sawing through two solid inch pieces of steel, but that is not light work. And so what was determined was that, yes, they misclassified the work. And the reason why is because if they correctly classified the work, the workers would have had a longer rest period as opposed to the work period, which means less work would get done, which means less production, which means the supervisors didn't get a better bonus. Oh well, right? This is something that I often see at odds is production versus heat stress. Because when you use the TLVs, if you cannot control heat strain on the body through some other methods, you're down to a work rest schedule. That's it. And that is going to be very much dependent on what you classify the work at. This could even go as far as when you're negotiating a contract, right? Typically, a union will have a health and safety portion in the contract. Well, if it's going to be in a high heat environment, maybe because the work's going to extend over summer months in any state, or maybe it's just in a state that's typically very hot and humid, you might want to pre-negotiate what that work load would be in the contract, because that is going to dictate considerably what the work rest schedule and how you're going to control workers' heat load. And if you can agree to it up front in the bargaining session, there should be no issue when you're out on the job. So that's stuff to consider. I can't say how much it is important to accurately classify this. I have time and time again seen the work underclassified. So instead of heavy work, classified as moderate or light, as opposed to very heavy, moderate or light, right? You don't want to underclassify it. And we'll look at why. So NIOSH recommends that employers institute a medical monitoring program for all workers who are or may be exposed to heat stress above the recommended action limits. So even if you're above a recommended action limit and you're still implementing a work rest schedule, NIOSH recommends that you are on a physiological monitoring program. And these are some examples of this. This is something that has to be pre-planned, pre-thought of, and it should be administered by a qualified person that has the training that qualifies them to administer tests like this. So this thing on the left, this is actually a pill that you swallow, and it's a thermometer. So it goes through your body, and it'll go through your body in about a work shift, and it's going to measure very accurately your internal core temperature, and it's going to read out on a device that's separate from your body. You've got patches down here, like on the lower left, where you put a patch on, and it can give you some physiological readings as well. We've got this polar Bluetooth heart rate monitor. I got one of these, you know, initially. I didn't enjoy wearing it much, but nonetheless, it accurately gauged my heart rate. You know, tympanic thermometers, O2 pulse meters, things like that, actually going old school stethoscope, you know, style and blood pressure monitoring, a scale, things like that. So these are all examples of different things, and you would probably do them in a combination of ways to look at physiological measurements that are going to, you know, look at what a worker's heat strain is. Any comments or questions? All right, we're going to get into the last real module, which is our controls, and then we're going to get into doing our heat stress activity here. So were folks able to print this activity out?
No, they weren't, Bernie. I'm going to put it in the chat now, but it might be something we want to walk through before we start that.
Okay, yeah, so we'll go through it, and I'll talk about it a little bit more. Okay, let's go. Controls. So there's 5 major types of engineering controls that we can look at: ventilation, air cooling, fans, shielding, and insulation. And remember, engineering controls, except for eliminating something, they're at the top of our list of what we'd like to do, right? Because it removes human behavior from the equation. It removes having, you know, a supervisor glare at a worker, things like that, right? So this here allows a control to be in place without human intervention unless somebody came by and tampered with it. Ventilation, just simply, you know, opening up your building or your work environment to outdoor fresh air. You know, examples, you got a training center, really hot day, maybe you've got a garage bay door that you can open. As long as it doesn't interfere with the type of education you're trying to give, you know, that's a really good method for introducing a heat control. Then we've got air cooling. So now we're actually going to temper the air. So we're going to, you know, compress the air, take the water vapor out of it, filter it as well, you know, make it a little cleaner for us to breathe. And you're going to allow it to absorb your sweat a lot better. So it's going to keep it at a more comfortable temperature for you. And again, some of these things are not always practical for work that IUPAT members are going to do. Some of them might be. A fan, so you're going to be directing air at a worker over their skin, right? Now, if you're going to use a fan, what are some of the environmental conditions you have to make sure that you meet if you're going to use a fan to try to reduce heat stress? So one of the things that you might be concerned about is if the air is hot or at or hotter than your core body temperature. So if you've got air that's 99, 100, 105 degrees, you know, blowing that at them, you might be adding to their convective heating, right? To their convective heat stress. If you're doing work and it's, you know, maybe it's 90 out, something like that. So it's less than your core body temperature, but the kind of work you're doing is so heavy, right? You're going to be producing a lot of watts. That's going to go to heat. So you're heating up, right? Even though the temperature is cooler than your core. This is an example where driving that air temperature past your body is going to reduce your heat load in your body. Now, what happens if the air is very humid? There's another example where you don't want to direct humid air at the person because you're going to potentially reduce the evaporative cooling from somebody. So you got to look at what those environmental conditions are before you just select a fan. In some conditions, they will help, and in some conditions, they might not help. They might do the opposite. They might add to a worker's heat stress. Insulation can reduce the effects of conductive heat. It's hard to believe, but you know, I've read case studies of wild firefighters actually deploying themselves into these emergency tents. And although they might get 2nd and 3rd degree burns when the fire rolls over them, they survive. So these, you know, insulative tents are pretty amazing. And here's an example of an insulative suit. If you've ever trained asbestos classes, you might have come across an old-time video of a worker in an asbestos suit going inside a oven, and the suit catches fire. They come out and take the hood off. I don't recommend that, but nonetheless, some of these insulative materials can do a great deal of heat reduction to the body. So now we get into administrative controls. So NIOSH recommends that there be signs placed in high heat environments, and this is their suggestive language. This comes right out of their recommendations for a heat stress criteria standard. Acclimation is a key component for reducing heat-related illnesses. Does anybody want to take a stab at what acclimation is, or acclimating a worker, or an athlete to a high heat environment is? What does that mean?
Well, basically, if they're not used to being outside in that heat, or like in this road gang right here that we're looking at, that they don't spend the first 10-hour shift out there.
Yeah, exactly. Right, they're not used to it. You're gonna throw them into the fire on their first day, no pun intended. So we're gonna look at acclimating because there's quite a bit more to it than people think, and you can lose it. And the Department of the Navy's done a lot of study on this, and that Navy guidebook on managing heat casualties that I gave out, it's got a lot of information in it. So these are Cal OSHA findings on acclimating. So I'll say acclimating, acclimatization, same thing. So these are Cal OSHA's acclimation findings, shed light on its importance. So during 2005, of their heat-related illnesses, 80% of them occurred within the first 4 days. But almost half of them occurred on the first day, right? So that to me says that, you know, most people weren't prepped to take that kind of heat. And 4% of them in 5 days to 2 week period. So that means that after the first 5 days, very, very few incidents happened. NIOSH suggests the following heat exposure duration for acclimatization. So there's two differences here. We've got an experienced heat worker, so someone that's used to that, a high heat environment, and someone who's not. Now, let's say if you work in, you know, Vegas and then you drive down to Phoenix, Arizona, that's an experienced heat worker, right? If you're used to working out in that environment. So you can say they do it over a 5 day period, where they introduce that work in that environment at 50%, 60, 80, and by day 4, they're up to 100. For a new worker who's not used to a heat environment, they do 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. According to the Navy and the Air Force, this might be a little too quick. So what happens when you're acclimated? So you gradually build up an ability to handle heat. So that heat strain that I talked about, that your body starts to go under, right, when it's suffering from heat stress, is going to work better. When your body gets used to the heat, your sweat becomes more efficient. So it's not necessarily that you sweat less or anything like that. You can dump more heat by sweating that way. So it works better. Blood flow to the skin is reduced. This is good news, right? So remember how I said that your blood does a lot of stuff? In addition to dumping heat, it still needs to feed the muscles that are working, still needs to feed the brain, right? So if you move less blood to the surface of your skin to dump heat, there's more available to do your work and other stuff, right? Less likely it is that you might faint if you're under heat strain. Heart rate becomes more stable, heart stroke volume increases, so that under that heat load, you're going to actually pump more blood with each, heart thump that happens, and blood volume increases. So you actually will have a higher blood volume in your body in those hot environments, as opposed to somebody who's not acclimated. So according to the Navy, full acclimatization may take up to 21 days. All right, so this was based off a lot of research that they did. Overall percent achievement, and they looked at a number of factors that I didn't include here because it would just not be nice on a slide. But they looked at things like, heart rate, blood pressure, lung volume, CO2 max, saturation of electrolytes, all these things. And they looked at each thing individually from the period of day 1 to day 21. And then they also looked at and scored it as an overall percent achievement for all those factors that they were looking at. So day 1, it was 13% achievement of the overall factors. Day 7, 45. So you can see that their research contradicted NIOSH's recommendation a little bit. NIOSH is using a 5-day acclimation, right, to get up to 100% work. But according to the Navy, their subjects in their studies, only 45% of them achieved, the value that they were looking for. Day 14, 78%, and by day 21, 99.9% of all those physiological factors of the body reacting to heat stress was achieved. So 21 days is a long time. It's not 5. That's a big difference, right, between 5 and 21 days. If you're having trouble acclimating, if you think that you're just not able to adjust to the heat, if you've got somebody who might have had a previous heat, illness, all these things, you want to make sure that you can have a safe path to bring these concerns up on the job site. Acclimating does not decrease your body's need for hydration. You still need to drink. So you want to keep hydrated. Dehydration can lead to severe health effects. The problem is our method for determining when we are dehydrated is terribly set. So our warning factors in our internal body for letting us know when we're dehydrated is way off. So we can lose as much as 5% of our body weight in water before our body starts to tell us, hey, you're dehydrated. And remember I said that ACGIH uses 1.5% of your body weight to be removed from that work environment. So, that's way before you might feel thirsty. That's way before you might feel signs of dehydration. So it's really important, regardless if you think you are not thirsty, drink it anyway. How often? We'll look at this. So this is what I was alluding to just a minute ago. Normally with light activity, your body loses 2 to 3 quarts of water a day. In hot weather environment, you could lose 2 to 3 gallons of sweat. So imagine the kind of work that IUPAT members might do that might get them to sweat a lot. So imagine your gallon of milk, right? So imagine losing 2 to 3 of those gallons a day. And if you're not going to replace that, now remember, a gallon of water is 8.366 pounds, right? So that's pretty heavy. So losing 3, we're talking 25 pounds of water you can lose in one day from significantly heavy hot work. Now, Ken, I know you're going to know what I'm talking about here. Boxers. You know, and MMA folks, they have to sometimes cut weight to meet their weight class. Otherwise, the match gets scratched, or they have to cough up extra money from their side of the earnings, or it might be an exhibition bout and the title's no longer on the line. Well, how do they lose that weight? It's not body fat.
It's water.
It's water. Ken, have you ever had to cut? You don't have to answer. Did you ever have to cut
I
weight?
can answer that question, yes, and I had to run around a gym with salt tablets and spitting in a bucket. So yes, taking all the water out of my system to make the
Did you
weight.
feel like having a fun-loving conversation with somebody while you were doing that?
It's not good.
No.
Not good.
Remember
That's why, just real quick, that's why when boxers back in history, they used to weigh in the same day of the fight. And there was a lot of deaths because of that, because what they would do is they would not make weight, they would lose all the water, they would weigh in again, and then they would fight that same day. They changed that, and that's why you get to weigh in at least the day before the fight, so they have a chance for their body to recuperate. So they'll make weight, but they're fighting heavier than they weigh in at.
Yep. Yeah, and sometimes a lot heavier by as many as 10 to 20 pounds, right? And it's a miserable thing to cut weight. It's not recommended. It's bad. And what Ken alluded to, you know, the boxing commissions in different states tried to implement some rules to make it safer for the boxers, right? Also, it's really not fair if you're going against somebody who's naturally 20 pounds heavier than you because they were better or more willing to cut a certain amount of weight. And in high school and college wrestling, they did the same thing because weight classes are very tight in wrestling. And, you know, even though they have requirements now, I coach wrestling, you know, in the high school, some of the kids are doing things they should not be doing to try to meet their weight class instead of, you know, losing weight appropriately to get into a lower weight class over time. They try to rush it by doing things that aren't appropriate. And now what we've seen, though, is in the beginning, kids have to get a hydration test, and then they have to weigh in, and they have to get a body percent test. And then the athletic trainer is going to dictate what weight class those kids can actually be in that season. And it's different for men and women because you're going to basically say right from the beginning of the season, don't even try it, kid. Do not even try getting down to that weight class because you're going to permanently hurt your body. And as a high school kid, or even, you know, or a kid in middle school, you're growing. Why would you do that to yourself? So saying all that, just imagine you doing work where you might lose, you know, up to 20 pounds of water in one work shift. Not good. The thirst mechanism, as I said, is not sensitive, and you can lose up to 2% body weight, you know, in water before you start to feel thirsty. So this is what OSHA recommends. You know, drink a cup of water every 15 to 20 minutes. Well, that is going to take time off of work, isn't it? But oh well, if you want workers to work in a hot environment, then let them have water every 15 to 20 minutes. Now, this can be coupled, you know, with a work rest schedule if that's something that you have in place. Otherwise, how can you make this happen? Put up lots of water places all around the work site so that workers don't have to drop their tools and go, you know, walk 10 minutes to get a cup of water. Put stuff right by them so they can take a cup of water and keep going. No alcohol, regardless of how I feel about margaritas. That's not scientific. No alcohol, no caffeine, and, you know, soft drinks and stuff like that, high sugar drinks, not so much of a good idea to have either. Train workers about heat stress issues. Again, I say this all the time, you get a lot of bang for your buck by doing awareness level training to workers. You know, in the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences Worker Education Training Program, that grant that CPWR gets to put on those HAZ-WOPR classes and stuff, they get that grant. One of the mottos there is we say that we are going to empower the worker through education. And there's nothing beats, except eliminating a hazard, nothing beats, you know, education. So maybe you can schedule work in cooler parts of a day or cooler parts of a season if possible. Set up break areas, right? It's a good idea if you can do them. That'll actually help reduce the worker's heat strain. So, putting them in an air-conditioned break room is great, things like that. The Navy has done research. Putting a worker in air-conditioned doesn't do anything to their acclimation, but it does take their heat stress, their heat strain down quite a bit before you put them back out. If you don't have access to something like that, shade is a good alternative. Maybe shade and a fan if the environmental conditions are appropriate. One of the things you have to consider, though, is this is just like hard, strenuous exercise. If I'm going for my max workout, there's no way I'm doing that the next day. I could try, and I can put myself at risk to getting hurt, and there goes my goals, right, for what I'm trying to achieve. If you're pushing yourself to the limit, working, and you're doing that, Monday and Tuesday, what do you think is going to happen to your body on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday? You're setting yourself up to have a higher risk of a heat-related illness or something else. Don't forget, all these things we've been talking about affect your ability to be able to produce force and things, right? So lifting. So what if your body just starts to go under heat strain? And so you're at reduced electrolytes by Wednesday. You're at reduced fluid and blood volume by Wednesday. So, you start picking up 5-gallon buckets of paint. And all of a sudden, when you could normally do that without a problem, you get, a pulled muscle or something else bad happens. You tear a tendon because the body no longer has what it needs to do that work that you could normally do without a problem. So all these things can add up. So we have to be cognizant of this. So this is where classifying work gets very important. I mentioned this. So here's the ACGIH work rest schedule for acclimatized workers. This is not a new worker. This is somebody who's acclimated. So what we're going to do is we would take our wet bulb globe temperature adjusted value from that device that we showed the picture of, and it's going to be in degrees Celsius. And then we're going to classify work as light, moderate, heavy, or very heavy. Just off the top of my head, I can't imagine much work from the IUPAT that would be in the light category. Anyway, but we'll talk about that more. So what you're going to do is let's say you're going to do work that's maybe moderate, right? And let's say my wet bulb globe adjusted temperature was 29. So I couldn't do 100% work. I couldn't do 75 work. I could, however, if it was 29, because I'm under 29.5, I could do 50% work with a 50% rest schedule, right? Because my wet bulb globe temperature adjusted reading was 29, and I'm doing moderate work. It allows me a 50-50 work schedule. Again, this is a recommendation. If you're working on a Department of Energy site, they say that their recommendation of the ACGIH is the rule, but this is not an OSHA rule. So if you're working on a site that's governed only by OSHA, this is a guidance. This is a recommendation. And this is adjustments based on workload only, not if you're wearing different clothing. Remember, I gave a table before where ACGIH looked at adding an adjustment if you're going to be in either a regular summer work outfit or single layer coveralls or double layer coveralls, right? You'd have to add that to your WBET value. Acclimated worker wet bulb globe exposure limit comparison. So this is adapted from the American Industrial Hygiene Association. I got this from the OSHA field manual for investigating heat stress. So this is just the different values from ACGIH, the American Industrial Hygiene Association, OSHA, ISO, and NIOSH, for what their different values are. This is an example of a work, rest, and water consumption table from the Army, right? They classify easy work, moderate work, and hard work. And then what they're going to do is you would have a heat category They would also use the wet bulb globe temperature device, and they're using it here in Fahrenheit. And then they would look at easy work, moderate work, and hard work, and they would have a work rest schedule as well as a qualified water intake in quarts per hour, which is good. So they're also adding to their heat stress management table water intake as well. Workers in conditions that increase the risk of heat stress should be personally monitored. And those would be the physiological things like we covered, you know, using a core body temperature, blood pressure, you know, heart rate, things like that. There's a method to determine whether or not you are recovered from heat exhaustion and heat strain on the body. So one of the things to think about, let's just go back to that, you know, max exercise example. If you're pushing your body, you're going to need longer to recover, okay? Like when I do a max power lift or something like that, like a deadlift or something, I'm not gonna go and lift the next day or a couple days later. I'm gonna probably take 5 days off. Research has shown that people who run a marathon need 30 days to fully recover their body. And in that time, you're going to have some detraining. So they might not be able to run their marathon as well by day 30. However, your body will be healed, right? If you're pushing yourself to the limit working, you know, you might not be ready to go back to work the next day in those same environments doing the same kind of work. So you're going to be increasing your risk to a heat-related illness or one of those other contributing accidents that we've talked about, right? Climbing ladders, things like that. So the ACGIH recommends frequency of physiological monitoring in minutes, depending on what the adjusted temperature is, and this is in degrees Fahrenheit. So again, adjusted temperature is wet bulb globe temperature. You know, if you're in normal clothing or impermeable clothing. So this here would be things like a Tyvek suit, right? Things like that. They recommend physiological monitoring every so many minutes. And again, this is important because remember, I said that this can sneak up on you, right? You could be like, oh, geez, I got this weird rash on my skin that just appeared. And then an hour later, you pass out, right? That's how that could happen. So physiological monitoring is a pretty good control for the body. Clothing inhibits transfer of heat quite a bit. The Department of Energy, their health, safety, and security, that's their like occupational health and safety department, follows the guidelines of ACGIH. They want workers acclimated. They want workers, you know, adjusted if they're wearing clothing. Working in an impermeable suit greatly increases risk of heat stress illness. So this is from a study that was done. Here is a normal monitored temperature outside, okay? The pink is wearing a like impermeable suit, like a level B suit or level A suit. And the maroon color is the same suit, but in direct sunlight, okay? So at 75 degrees, the person wearing impermeable clothing was at actual 80-degree temperature inside the suit. If they went to the direct sunlight, they were at 93 degrees. Now look what happens if they were at 80. Jumped up to 91 inside the suit and 104 in direct sunlight. You know that whole thing about what happens inside your car if it's in the heat and the sun? That's exactly what's happening inside these impermeable suits. You're cooking yourself like your Thanksgiving turkey. It is incredibly important that if you or a worker around you is wearing impermeable clothing and it's a high heat environment, that somebody has been responsible, designated to protect their well-being when they're wearing this clothing. Because as you can see from this graph, right, it's a much hotter environment inside. Not to mention what's happening to their sweat if you're wearing impermeable clothing. It ain't evaporating, right? You're basically making yourself a jungle inside that clothing. Have you ever worn like level B or level A suit right? Even if it's just during training and you get out of it and you dump out your boot and water just pours out of it, disgusting, that's your own sweat, right? That's what's happening. So you're sweating inside that suit. It's not going anywhere. Your body is not going to be able to dump its heat through sweat. These are some adjustments that NIOSH recommends for wearing this type of clothing. All right, so they've got it in degrees Celsius and Fahrenheit. So polyethylene-based particle barrier coveralls, you can see they add 0.9. I'm going to switch to Fahrenheit here. So almost a degree. But look at if you're wearing a limited use vapor barrier. So now I'm talking about like your Tyvek level B suit or level A suit. They recommend you add 18 degrees Fahrenheit to that. So let's say I take my wet bulb globe temperature device and I measure, it is 80 degrees adjusted value. Now I take that 80 degrees and I add 18 degrees to it. Now you're at 98 degrees adjusted value because you're wearing that suit in that heat environment. Probably you're not going to be able to work in that environment because it's just going to be too damn hot for the body to deal with. So it's very important we look at all these factors. Protective clothing, encapsulating impermeable liquid resistant clothing, and what it does to heat stress. So there's no real current consensus on appropriate adjustments. NIOSH gave their idea. You might have argument from somebody who wants to put a worker out there. But professionally, I would go with that NIOSH adjusted value. A 10 degrees Celsius adjustment for encapsulating protective suits is probably reasonable. So that's, again, that's close to 18 degrees. In NIOSH and ACGIH, they would like to see physiological monitoring in addition to other controls if you're wearing one of those impermeable suits. Use the buddy system. If you're dressing up in this stuff, the buddy system can help you recognize some of those symptoms of heat-related illnesses in your workmates. Protective clothing actually was found to increase radiological exposure. So Reichelt, Clay, and Eichhorst analyzed 68 cases in the ORBS database, which is an incident reporting system in the Department of Energy for rad contamination through protective clothing. And they found that 84% of the incidents in that database identified hot, humid, or damp conditions, and most involved strenuous work with perspiration. The cloth or water-resistant clothing often fails to protect during damaging work or demanding work. Multiple layers don't give you more protection against the radiological contamination. Some of the incidents, they had 4 layers of clothing on to try to protect them from radiological contamination. And if you add multiple layers of clothing, what are you going to do? You're greatly going to increase your heat risk, right, to related illnesses. And 79% of those cases in that database, the clothing was soaked from sweat. So what does this mean? If you are wearing, multiple layers of clothing to try to protect you from a chemical exposure, because remember, radiological exposures are typically particulate stuff. So they're a little bit bigger than some of your chemical exposures like gases and vapors. You might be putting on multiple layers to protect yourself from a really nasty chemical, but because of the sweat and heat that's going on, you might actually be increasing your exposure to those chemicals and adding to a heat-related illness risk, right? So these are circumstances where you're going to want to make sure that an industrial hygienist has been, on board to basically protect workers during these kinds of events. You can add some PPE. Reflective clothing, ice vests, wetted clothing can help if the environment's right, if you've got low relative humidity. Water-cooled garments as well, circulating air. This cool shirt device here, I think this is like $7,000 to get this whole unit with one vest. So it's a way to, cool the garment down. You can go and recharge it kind of thing. This is one of their same products. It's a ice-cooled vest. I think that was like $79 or $80. But again, you're adding bulk to yourself. You're adding weight. This chill it kind of device. My son talked me into this when we were at Disney World a couple years ago. For some reason, I ended up buying 2 for him. I don't know why, but these worked. He filled it up with cold water, and it seemed to work. He said it kept him cool. Effects of ice cooling on work in PPE. So this was an example that, ice-cooled vests did provide a little bit of cooling at lower temperatures, but at higher temperatures, they weren't able to work as long. So it did provide some benefit at lower temperatures, but at hotter temperatures, not as much. So findings from the Cortex body cooling system, they actually did, that graph was done through a Department of Defense study on a Department of Energy site with that Cortex pill that you would swallow. And that's how they were able to get that data about internal cooling when they were using the ice vest in different temperatures. This is a device that's still advertised. I first saw it, almost close to a decade ago. I haven't seen any peer-reviewed research on it. One of the things I do, I will admit, sometimes I have pushed myself, mainly because I would take time off of doing my activities, and I start back, and I think I was in the same shape as I was when I left. So I would suffer lactic acid poisoning, and I would get sick. So one of the things I would do, I would run my wrists underneath cold water and put an ice pack on my neck, because that would help bring me back to life. Because what we're doing is I'm dumping heat to those areas. This is the same kind of theory, that you've got this water chilled circulated pump through the palms of your hands. It should work in theory, but I have not seen any peer-reviewed study on it, which I would want to see if I were to ever recommend something like this. And that's it. Does anybody have any comments or questions? None? All right. What I think I'm going to do is, we're approaching our 3-hour mark. I'm going to just flash up the activity in Word, since we don't have it printed out. Let's see here.
And just so everybody knows, I loaded a copy in the chat, and then I also sent it to each of you via email too, if you wanted to pop it up, but it's not necessary if Bernie's got it.
Mm-hmm. All right. Can folks see this okay? Is it a Word document, I hope?
It's not on the Word document yet, Bernie.
All right. What I got to do here? Stop sharing, share screen.
There you go.
How's this?
It's
all right, cool.
not,
All right, so we won't actually go through and do this. I'll just kind of work through it. Again, face-to-face training, this has a lot of benefit, because you're going to get people out of the seats. They're going to actually use the device, and then calculate a work rest schedule and come up with a heat reduction, illness plan. So, they're going to be able to use the resources and things like that you'll present to them during class. And, the first job. And so what I would do is let's say if I had, 5 groups, I would have 5 wet bulb globe temperature devices. I would go and I would place them at different areas at the training center. Maybe I'd place one inside. Maybe I would place one like during an entry doorway, vestibule kind of thing. Maybe I would put one out in somebody's car or truck. I'd have one out in direct sunlight. I'd have one outside, maybe on a rooftop if it's safe to access it, things like that, right? And then that group would be assigned a job, and they'd have to go and read their assigned wet bulb globe temperature device and then do the work. So here I've got job 1 outside and partially inside. IUPAT members will be working with Teamsters to unload multiple trailers of trade show equipment. This work must be done quickly over 3 days to ensure setup deadlines are met. The conference is located at the Orlando Convention Center and takes place the second week of June. So that's one activity, right? So you would sign that to a table, send them off to one of the heat monitoring stations. Number 2, outside, a glazer is placing windows in a 1-story office building structure. She has one apprentice working with her throughout the day when needed. The rest of the time, the apprentice is working indoors and outdoors cleaning up construction waste. This work task will take 4 days to complete. Job 3, mostly outside. IUPAT radiological workers are removing radiological contaminated coatings from concrete structures at Hanford, Washington, using a handheld and walk-behind scarifier. The work crew is wearing level C PPE required for the work, etc. So you'd send them off to, get the readings. A paint crew is on a rooftop of a 30-story hotel in Las Vegas, Nevada, rigging swing stages. The task will take approximately 2 days. I've got one where you're using oil-based paint to coat dozens of steel doors, jambs, and casings in a large complex of storage unit buildings. The HVAC system, which only feeds conditioned units in the lobby offices, is not operational, and this is going to be indoor work. And then mostly inside, 2 workers are entering a confined space to remove old coatings and recoat large above-ground storage tanks that are located outdoors. One entrant is new to the confined space work, but has worked outdoors at the site for a year in this area. The work will take 2 months and take place during July and August. So that's the activity. And then what they would do is they would come back with their wet bulb globe temperature reading. You could even have them do it 2 ways. You could have them take the calculated reading, and you could have them look at each individual globe, wet bulb, and what am I thinking? And wet bulb and natural bulb temperature, and then calculate what the adjusted temperature would be. You could do it both ways. And then they will apply what they got to any clothing variables that they've got in there, right? So if somebody's wearing coveralls, they might add, I don't know, whatever ACGIH said, 3 degrees Fahrenheit to it. And then they would apply that to an ACGIH work rest schedule. And maybe they might come up with some other ideas to control the heat stress on that job. And that's the activity. And if you can get folks to complete this activity and they do a reasonable job at developing some sound controls, and they're able to read the device and have a good discussion about it, you can be confident that they would be able to go out and recognize, at an awareness level, heat stress factors out on their job, that might lead to heat stress illnesses. So that's it, folks. I wish we could have done this in person, because doing this activity face-to-face is actually a lot of fun doing it. But nonetheless, COVID, thank you very much. We're stuck where we are. With that said, I think we've got another poll question. And I will stop sharing this screen and put it back to the other one. Can you guys see the PowerPoint again?
Yes.
It says now time for group activity.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. All right, here's some resources that I used for this. There's a lot more that went into this, but you're going to have a good smattering of reading of the stuff that I sent. You should find it pretty useful. All right, do we have a poll result?
Yes.
What do we got?
We got 64% says yes, and 36% say no.
Okay.
On have you tried to control heat stress on the job?
Okay, for some reason I can't see the poll, but that's okay. So for the folks that said yes, how have you tried to control heat stress?
Tried to rotate the job position, tried to work in the shade.
Okay, good. Yep.
Typically, we used to use fans, and I make the drinking water available. Ice the drinking water.
Yep. Cold drinking water is very good. What else?
We
I
use
would-
inline air helmet air conditioners too when we were blasted.
Nice. Yep. Yep. Yeah, and doing that, I mean, it's going to, reduce your humidity above your skin. So it's going to help, remove the sweat. Anything else?
One comment on the air conditioners, they work really, really, really great. But if you're outside and your body's heating up itself and you're cooling down your head, you can have a false security that you're okay. Just want to keep that in mind. They work really good, but there could be an issue there if it's not looked at.
Yep. Good point, Ken. All right. That's it. We did it. I don't know what the temperature is in my office right now. It's not good. 90. Beautiful. All right, trainers. Anybody have any questions about anything that we covered? Anything that you want to ask me? That is real fire, by the way. I did jump over that. It's fun.
Make a comment.
Yeah.
In class, because I think some of them might know, but some of them might not know, is that most of the training centers, I'm not going to say all, but I'm going to say most of the training centers is what they call a proctor kit. And there is a type 2 gauge in there, which is an electronic ambient temperature gauge that'll show a dry bulb and a wet bulb. And there is a sling psychrometer that's usually in that kit. And there's the blue book, which is a psychometric chart. You just have to make sure that you're on the right particular pressure. That book has got different pressures in there, and then you can find your readings. So if you do not have the gauge that we're talking about, which is the really great gauge, and it's effective and it would stand up in court, you should have those other options within the training center.
Yeah. Remember though, so to use the ACIGH-TLV, you've got to make sure that you can calculate the adjusted wet bulb globe temperature. So you have to be able to do radiant heat as well. Anything else? I know that Nicole has a couple of management type things to discuss, but does anybody have any other comments, questions about teaching this, etc.? Anything that you would like to see me do to the course material to improve it, make it better suited for you? Anything like that?
Just
anybody?
to
Go ahead.
all the instructors is remember that these courses are what I would call living courses. So prior to teaching a course or to your members, check the LMS to make sure that if there's any updates, you got the most current version.
Anything else? Any comments or questions? All right, I'm going to mute myself and let Nicole take over and put on the air conditioner that I desperately need. Everybody, thank you very much for attending and taking this course. Hopefully, it's going to be of use to you and your members at your affiliated sites. If you have any questions about heat stress in general, for IUPAT members about delivering this course, whatever, don't hesitate to reach out to Ken or I. That is what we're here for. You're welcome.
You guys did great. Just some quick, I know everybody was a little bit concerned about the handouts, and I just want to show you, here's the LMS, and then here are the handouts. Bernie, I don't know if you want to kind of just talk through what they are, what the resources are, just real quick.
Yeah.
But as you can see, there's a lot in here. So today's PowerPoint will be in there, the activity, obviously, and then if Bernie, I don't know if you want to start at any one particular one.
Yeah, let's do the top. Thanks, Nicole. Now I can't put my air conditioner on. Actually, sweating.
I'm sorry.
You're killing me. You owe me a margarita.
Absolutely.
So this first one is for Canada. It's the Humidex-based heat response plan.
Okay.
The next one is just an OSHA handout. It's like I think it's like a wallet card set. The next one is OSHA's heat stress training guide. So they give some examples of kinds of things that you should talk about for heat stress training, what should go into it. What we've got here covers everything and more, but you might have some other stuff that you might want to put in. Let's see, the next one is OSHA's info sheet. So again, it's another fact sheet, fact card, good to use for like tailgates. Let's see, the next one is Ontario's heat stress guide. So this was a really good item from Canada, but it's just for Ontario. So again, if you want to make sure that you check with the province you're in up in Ontario, just like you should check if you're here in the US, if your state has something specific for heat stress. The next one is EPA's excessive heat stress guidebook. So this talks about, heat events, throughout the globe in the US. EPA's heat stress deaths from 2016. Let's see. The next one is prevention and heat treatment. I think this is the Department of Navy. Then we got some NIOSH fast facts on heat stress. The NIOSH heat stress recommended standard 2016. This is one that I really suggest you read through, if anything. NIOSH heat stress infographic, again, something that if you want to print out, give out to students during class, etc. Something quick and easy. This way here, you don't have to go and hunt through this stuff on your own if you don't want. The heat stress pan. Oh, I think is this what we did, Nicole? Yeah. Okay. And then the final activity, which is this thing, that I went through here, and then the PowerPoint. That'll do it.
Perfect. And just a reminder for your training survey, I also put the name of the training survey in the chat for everybody. So just sometime this week, if you guys could get to it by Friday, that would really help us out. Let us know how we did. Let us know how we can improve this. Give Bernie lots of feedback. He likes it. And I guess that's pretty much it. Ken, did you have anything that you wanted to share with everyone before we depart?
No, yes, I do. So this is a very important course, as we all know. And I said at the beginning, I think it's something that we overlook sometimes. I don't think it's looked at on the job as much as it should be. But a course is just a course unless we're teaching it to our members. And, as an instructor myself, I truly believe that when we have information, we need to share it for our members, especially if it could save a life. So that's what I got.
I just want to say
That's
one
it
thing.
for
This is
me.
Alice, Bernie. I just have one thing to say. We are in the process of putting together a core course for this for your students. It is up there for 178. It has all of the same materials, and we'll probably be adding some things to that as well. There is not currently an e-learning lesson to it, but we'll be talking about that in the near future.
All right, that's all I got. Any parting questions, comments? It's 5 o'clock somewhere.
We're quarter up. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Bernie. Thank you, Alice. Everybody have a great evening. Stay safe and cool out there. And we'll see you guys again soon.
Thank you.